Before we sat today, I was mentioning how the body, which we inhabit, we use, allows us to function, allows us to taste life, to be in life, to be living. In the absence of sati, when it's not present with sati, with mindfulness, when it is not with full awareness, then it becomes another tool, another instrument for Mara. But when we introduce sati, when we introduce mindfulness, when we introduce sampajanya, which is the full awareness doesn't mean always like cringing and, getting all wrinkled up and white-knuckled and trying to force yourself to be doing something unnatural. No, you're simply aware. As the body moves from here, there, sitting, standing, lying down, walking. When you have that, then the body becomes a tool for the Dhamma, not Mara. So, as I mentioned, as you were sitting, when we are practicing mindfulness, what we essentially are doing is establishing, starting, putting the anchor down for something called a new habit formation. But you have a entire eons worth of lifetimes where that was not the case. That has not been the case, even in this lifetime, where you're not with a full aware state. Emotions can easily dominate. All it takes is a little bit of some type of a hitch, some type of a unwanted knot in the stream, in the flow of the day that you want it to be, for it to just flow by without any issues. But something does happen, and all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. The difficulty is it just starts tumbling down. It just starts falling on our head. It's just, we lose control. A make-believe control, which was basically never a situation where we were in control to begin with. See, asati, or mindless living, or absent-mindedly living, etc., however you want to term it, gives us the illusion that we are in control. When we have certain proclivities, certain tendencies, certain triggers. Yes, triggers. And we think that we have it all nailed down, we figured it out. But with just basically a situation of we are a time bomb. We're just, if the right conditions are there, then you better watch out. The world has better watch out. Because I will snap. Well, where does that leave the Dhamma in all of that commotion? So this is what we mean by the Dhamma is not an intellectual affair. It's a lived experience, but it's not a one-time, sometime a thing that haphazardly happened, and we recall that in fuzzy, loving memory of it, and we hope that it permeates its aroma, fragrance throughout the rest of our day until the next hitch happens, the next issue happens. That's not Dhamma. That's wishful living. That's you're not in control. The outside circumstances control you. The six senses control you. Mara controls you. The world controls you. And when, let's say, we're practicing diligently in this life, you have countless lifetimes of the opposite tendencies working against you. The defilements in the heart, the kileshas, they're known to Mara. Your defilements know you better than you know yourself. That's why they come to block the Dhamma. These are not abstractions. These are abundantly made clear the moment you have even a tiny little moment of sati. That is power, on the other hand. That's why Lord Buddha always began his instructions talking about, especially in relation to the 37 aids to enlightenment, awakening, always started with sati. You have sati in the 7 factors of awakening. You have sati there in the pancha indriya, 5 faculties. You have sati there in the middle of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's everywhere. Sati, you cannot have. It's like, I think one time, years ago, someone asked about sati, and I said, imagine you're driving in the dark, in the pitch blackness of night, and there are no street lights, no lamps, no nothing. You don't even have a flashlight, but you do have the car's headlights. You're driving the car. Sati is that. That's one way of looking at sati. So if you're going to be traveling in the dark, and many of us are going at high speed in the dark, we don't even know where we're going. But even that, the headlights are turned off. So sati is not something less important than, let's say, something else, something that you might consider more lofty. Some attainment, some. Without sati, nothing happens. Nothing constructive happens. Not just in the circle of Dhamma, as far as Dhamma is concerned, but if you're nailing, if you're hitting a hammer, with a hammer, a nail, you're trying to get a nail into the wall or on a piece of, plank of wood. If you don't have sati, you're going to smack, you're going to hit your thumb, your index, something, your hand, because you're careless, you're mindless. But that's what we're doing. So here we have a sutta today, which we'll get from the Anguttara Nikāya, this time the Numerical Discourses. It is about the 3. To simplify, Lord Buddha just used the term in Pali is basically Tayodhamma, which 3 things. You can call it 3 characteristics, 3 features, 3 aspects, 3 things basically. But we're going to see how they cover the whole range of how we function, how we live, and definitely what keeps us in the dark. What are some of the things that drive us to turn off the lights, the headlights, for example, using that simile that I was sharing with you earlier. So this sutta is the Tayodhamma, and it comes from the book of the Tens, Dasaka Nipata of the Anguttara Nikāya, sutta number 10.76, the 3 things. So please see the role of these 3 things in the way you become animated in life. What I'm trying to say is, what keeps you going in life? What is it that you are fueled by? You can bring it into the realm of relationships. You can bring it into your daily living, responsibilities, especially the concern or the interest in the Dhamma, am I practicing it correctly? Self-judgment or criticism, as well as when you find yourself really smoothly sailing, deepening your practice, see the presence or absence of these. And as you guessed it, these are not just one set of three things. Lord Buddha is going to cover several and how they nuance into each other. So they open up, unfold into each other. And it's like multiple layers. It's if you look down at a digital painting, which works with many, many layers, you can think of them as transparent layers, but having one single information or one color, one brush stroke of certain feature, some pattern. And then you put that over something else that's also transparent, but has another area of it covered in color, etc., etc. And then you're looking at it from the top, and all of a sudden you see the full picture. However, there are multitudes of layers. So life makes us think that it's all a one piece. And the Dhamma that Lord Buddha taught is anything but that. That's what Lord Buddha did for 45 years. He kept on unraveling this thing called life, starting with the person, with the five aggregates. Where is the person? Where is the self? What is this thing, this you, this life, this person, this being? He said there's five aggregates. They're just leaning on each other. You pull one. Once I pull out one of those layers out, the picture is no longer the same. If I place it over something else, another layer, now it's completely different. But the mind is lazy because it likes to simplify, oversimplify, because it doesn't want to do work. Hence, we don't want to practice sati unless we turn it into a habit, into a new pattern, and we see the benefits of it. Because for the first time, you really enjoy the food you're eating. You really enjoy the sky, the blue sky when you look at it, or a leaflet that you find on the ground, even when it's the middle of autumn or fall, and you look and it's brown. It's like all the chlorophyll is gone, chloroplasts are gone, but it's beautiful. You're present to it. That's why you're seeing it. And when you listen to the Dhamma with sati, all of a sudden everything fits into place, because you're not butting in. You're observing what's happening, and you're seeing your connection to the Dhamma in that sense, in that fashion. So that's my invitation here as we're listening. And especially if you can, listen while you're sitting, allowing it to seep in. So let's begin. Bhikkhus, if these three troubling facts were not present in the world, then the Tathagata, the perfectly self-awakened Arahant, would not arise or appear in the world. And similarly, the Dhamma that is declared by the Tathagata would not arise to shine its brilliance throughout the world either. And what are these three facts? Birth, aging, and death. Bhikkhus, if these three troubling facts were not present in the world, then the Tathagata, the perfectly self-awakened Arahant, would not arise or appear in the world. And similarly, the Dhamma that is declared by the Tathagata would not arise to shine its brilliance throughout the world either. However, Bhikkhus, since these three troubling facts are indeed present in the world, then the Tathagata, the perfectly self-awakened Arahant, arises by appearing in the world. And similarly, the Dhamma that is declared by the Tathagata arises to shine its brilliance throughout the world. This is basically challenging our own position, our own understanding of the Dhamma, from the very get-go, as they say. Oftentimes, many people came to Lord Buddha to engage him in a debate, If you recall the 10 unanswered questions that Lord Buddha did not declare, he put them aside. He said, this is totally, it doesn't help. Is the world infinite? Is it finite? Is the Tathagata alive? Is he not alive? Does he go to another realm, etc.? All these similar questions, philosophical questions, that other religious teachers of his day were trying to answer, having either a pro or anti position, nevertheless a position towards, therefore not leaving it undeclared, having a position towards them. Lord Buddha was never even touching upon them, never addressing them, as we saw in the Tayodhamma Sutta a couple of months ago. But what was he bringing it down to? Like, what was, remember Pottapada, the ascetic, wandering ascetic from another sect that kept on asking these questions to Lord Buddha? He kind of gave up at the end, and he's like, okay, he's tired, and he's like, okay, is there anything that the Tathagata or the Blessed One here categorically states, does not leave undeclared, basically? And he says, yes. There is suffering, and that there's a way out of suffering. Now, the fact that there is birth, the fact that there is getting old, aging, and there is death, that is plenty of suffering right there. So the presence of a Tathagata is to address these three problems. Whether the world is eternal or it's not, whether the Tathagata exists or not after death, these are totally unrelated, irrelevant, totally useless questions, deserving useless answers, basically. But these, birth, everyone can relate to that. Aging, everyone can relate to that. Death, everyone soon enough will relate to that. It's painful. That is why we have the Dhamma, Lord Buddha is saying, not anything else. So he's putting the priorities straight for listeners, which we desperately need at this time in the world. We're always going outside of ourselves to fix this, fix the world, fix that, fix those people over there, fix the economy, fix the government, fix the climate, fix the planet, fix this, whatever. All of it avoiding these three. Why? Because you can only address these three through working on yourself. You cannot attain Nibbana for someone else, or you cannot give Nibbana to someone else. You cannot make someone see Nibbana. You cannot make someone even taste dukkha fully. They have to be present to it. Similarly, to be at a point where you can appreciate, truly appreciate dukkha, no one can do that for you. And by the same token, to find release from dukkha, hence Nibbana is release from dukkha. This is dukkha. This three-pronged phenomena, the Tayodhamma, this was the first Tayodhamma, by the way, the three things set that Lord Buddha is addressing. This is why you have a Tathagata, he says. Not for self-aggrandizement, not to have some prestige, not to have a following, not to have even Dhamma, for the sake of having Dhamma. Well, the Dhamma has to serve a purpose. Not to have a temple, not to have this, not to have titles, this, that. No. Lord Buddha is very practical. Because there's birth, he says, there's the Tathagata. And there's the Dhamma that the Tathagata is teaching for that purpose. Because there's getting old, aging, and it's inescapable, there's a Tathagata and there's a Dhamma that the Tathagata teaches for that purpose. And because there is death, and no one can escape it. No one. And then you have a Tathagata teaching a Dhamma to release you from further death. That's why Nibbana is called the deathless. Once the person breaks through understanding. Now we get to the second collection here. Know this, bhikkhus, that without first having dispelled and abandoned three things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon birth, aging, and death. So he's saying, but it's so beautiful, it's so packed, it's so perfectly aligned. He just gave us birth, aging, and death, okay, as a disease. Think of it as the virus, as the infected area. And now he's saying, if you want to address that, or that collection of three, or those three, then you need to first abandon, dispel these other three things. So this is the second set of threes, which Lord Buddha is going to say. And what are these three? Lust, hatred, and delusion. Lobha, dosa, moha. Earlier I was mentioning kilesa or kilesa, and that is the Pali term for defilements in the heart. These are the things that we carry. These are not someone else's defilements, it's ours. We are the authors of it. We have worked on them. These are the things that keep us in the cesspool of life after death. Life, again, again. Death, again and again. New relationships, making new commitments, new intentions, new desires, new objectives, thinking that we're starting life anew, thinking that this is the only life. No. Lust or greed, hatred, and delusion, which basically the whole existence, loka is oftentimes actually people translate it as the world, but it's not the world, because sometimes people might misconstrue that loka as this world, meaning this planet. No, loka means existence, the entirety of existence is caught in these three. Now, it has different nuances, of course. For some people, it might be heavier, grosser, detectable from far away, type of a lust. You can smell it a mile away. Type of a hatred. The delusion, similarly. But in others, they're far more subtle. Subtle. These are, you can call them the spiritual types. We have plenty of them in the Dhamma circles. You might have come across a few of them, but it's very subtle. But this is why Lord Buddha, in the Vimamsaka Sutta, from the Majjhima Nikāya, middle length discourses, he said you need to associate with someone for some time in order for you to really make that call that this person indeed is holy. This person is indeed something fishy is there, something I can't detect, but there's anger there. So we shouldn't be fooled by the loudness, how loud the lust is, how loud the hatred is, or the delusion in a person, because they can have many gradations to it. Now, an arahant is a person who's completely abandoned these three. That's why they are beyond birth, beyond aging, beyond death, because they're never coming back to any realm of existence. That's why they've tasted the amata dhatu, the deathless element. Why? Because they've eradicated, removed these three kilesas, the defilements of lust, hatred, and delusion. Lord Buddha continues, so bhikkhus, without having first dispelled and abandoned these three things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon birth, aging, and death. And he goes to the third one. And bhikkhus, so as you see, it's like one piece is connected to another piece, so they're all built over one another. And bhikkhus, without first having dispelled and abandoned three things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon lust, hatred, and delusion. So you have to address three other things, which basically nail, which get, address, attack, dislodge, abandon, dispel, eradicate lobha, dosa, moha. And what are these three? Lord Buddha asks. The view of having a personal and substantially unchanging essence of a self. Atta, me, am asmimana. This is me. Doubts about what the true path is. That's the second. And holding on to the view that ceremonies and rituals would somehow release one from suffering or lead one to attain the goal of the holy life. The belief in rites and rituals, somehow. The rites and rituals, mind you, are not things that only occur at a temple or at a specific religious ceremony. Most of the rites and rituals are conducted in our own household, in our room, in our own minds, in our own behaviors. What we tell ourselves, if I do this, then I'm practicing the Dhamma. Okay. How valid is that? How true is that? Is it true? Truly based on the Dhamma? And this is very personal. This whole sutta is quite personal. All of them are, in my opinion, but see if you can identify something here pertaining to you and your own way of thinking, your own way of approaching the Dhamma. So the personality, even though, yes, the Dhamma says, Sakkaya Ditthi is bad, the personality view that there is this, unchanging thing that is permanent in the face of all, the self that keeps being born again and again and again. Me. How am I distant from that way of thinking? Am I? Really, if I scratch the surface, am I really fully free from that? And the second one is big. Doubts about what the true path is, what the true Dhamma is. And that also includes, by extension, the teaching that you receive, the teacher with whom you associate, the Dhamma that they're sharing. Presuming that it is in Dhamma circles that the person is involved. It might be true Dhamma, it might not be. It might be some quasi or something made up or not even experienced. Or you don't even have a teacher, you're just referring to the suttas and you're trying to find the Dhamma, but then you grab on to something that has some validity, something deep, something viscerally true, but you don't know what it is. But then when life happens, you drop that and you go back with your habitual tendencies and you go back to the defilements. What is that? What just took place? Lack of saddha, lack of true belief, or not belief, faith in your heart in the truth and legitimacy of the Dhamma that attracted you in the first place. This is something that happens all the time. Even Venerable Ananda, being the attendant to Lord Buddha for 25 years, having known him all his life, still doubted at times Lord Buddha. So, and then there's the rites and rituals part. Unfortunately, the Dhamma in the recent centuries, that's what it has turned into. So, Lord Buddha is saying, unless the person has abandoned these three, then it's going to be it's going to be impossible to remove the three kilesas, the three defilements, lust, hatred, and delusion. So you see how important it is to pay attention to whether there is the presence of Sakkaya Ditthi, this personality view that is unchanging, that is a self, that is a present. The doubt and the rites and rituals, belief that they will take you to Nibbana or some ritualistic thing. I know even in some traditions, if you do certain amount of prostrations, you're getting closer to Nibbana. In fact, you might actually attain it as you're doing the prostrations. They believe this, or saying certain amount of mantras. or certain types of pranayama techniques, breathing techniques. If you do, there was one tradition I was involved in over 35 years ago. And that's what they believe, that if you breathe like this in this, it was the Kriya technique, from SRF years ago, a lifetime ago. And that's what we were taught. If you breathe about 1,000,000 times, you could attain freedom, moksha, they call it. I believe that. So these are all rites and rituals. The giant's saying, if you don't step on the grass, if you don't eat, let's say, anything to do with animals, you cover your mouth as you're walking because you're protecting microbes and things from going into your mouth. If you don't drink cold water, because they believe there's beings in the cold water, so they would boil it and then drink the water. All these are rites and rituals that made them, they believe to this day, to take them to closer and closer to moksha, to liberation. Now, of course, we don't have to go too far from Dhammic circles to see the ridiculousness of what today's Dhamma has turned into in temples, monasteries, chantings. But I've mentioned enough about chantings in the past, so I don't want to dwell on that. So, therefore, bhikkhus, without having dispelled and abandoned these three things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon lust, hatred, and delusion. So Lord Buddha is tracing it back. Every single teaching Lord Buddha gave, there's a reason. And it is attached to another set of principles. That's why it's never a situation, even when you're trying to understand and explore the paticca-samuppada, the law of dependent origination, the 12 links, you can start from anywhere in the Dhamma, and you still are talking about paticca-samuppada. You can talk about sati, and it is connected to paticca-samuppada. It is connected to the 4 right efforts. It is connected to the 5 indriyas. It is connected to the 7 factors of awakening. It is connected to the defilements. And that's why Lord Buddha says how it's like the salt in the ocean, the Dhamma itself. Wherever you taste it, it tastes the same. Whichever coastline, whichever sea you go to on the planet, it always will taste the same, saltiness. And that is, there is dukkha and there is nirodha, freedom from dukkha. And that's what these teachings are. So that's why Lord Buddha also mentions how even if it's a small verse, a small line, just a single teaching from the Dhamma, that's what you can hold, that's what you can go back to and refer back to keep you in focus. That's plenty already. Number 4, further, because without first having dispelled and abandoned 3 things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon the view of having a personal and substantially unchanging essence of a self. Doubts about what the true path is, and the holding on to the view that ceremonies and rituals would somehow release one from suffering or lead one to attain the goal of the holy life. Now, what are these 3 things? Unwise radical attention, pursuing the wrong spiritual path and training, and having an unmotivated heart with a listless mind. Unwise radical attention is the opposite of wise radical attention, which is yoniso manasikara. So ayoniso manasikara is placing the attention on the wrong things, which is today's society. Every time you reach over for your phone to look at something, there's an ad, something that's going to try to grab your attention. Where's your attention? At the thing or at what's happening because of that thing that you're observing? Or bringing it closer to home, the 6 sense spheres or the 6 sense organs. Your eyes are catching a sight. Your ears are catching a sound, the smell, the nose, etc. That still is, if you're placing the attention on the object, then you are placing the attention unwisely. The attention need not or should not be on that thing over there that your eyes are catching. No, because that itself is changing and you have no control over that. Similarly to the organ that caught it. So it's not even on the eye itself that caught that image, that the ear that caught that sound. No, there's something deeper. What is my relationship to what just took place? That consciousness that took place, which is what? What are we talking about? The consciousness. Okay, there's no third as a consciousness thing happening. The object is there, the eye, fine, we get it. But because of these two, there's this thing that spark happens. But we don't stay there, do we? It does something to us. We have a position, we have a relationship to it. Now there is a feeling, and the feeling turns into distinctive, clear-cut flavor of a feeling. Usually, I like it, I hate it, or neutral. But usually these two, I like it, oh, I want to see more of that. Or, please, why did I have to see that? The unwise attention happens there. Now, even though 72% of the information that comes in from the outside world comes through the eyes, but it is the mind, manovinyana, that is dictating everything, even when your eyes are closed shut, even when there's nothing audible as you're laying in bed, even though you're not tasting anything in your bed, but you nevertheless are tossing and turning, sitting in your car, driving, let's say, and there's nothing that irritates you, but there is that thought, the memory, the image of what happened to you earlier in that meeting, that somebody said something, or you saw something. Where's the attention? The object, or what is the mind doing now? The point of contact, that's what we're concerned with. So this person, however, in order for them to maintain sakkaya ditthi, this view of a personality, to maintain this doubtful position towards the Dhamma, to keep the rites and ritual thing going, is a person who, to begin with, doesn't have yoniso manasikara, doesn't have wise radical attention. What do they have? The opposite. They place the attention on someone else or something else. It's like looking at like in the case of the American, United States, to be exact, presidential elections, looking at a person and saying, that's the person, good or bad, that's the person, as if that person is responsible for everything. It's so juvenile, it's so childish, infantile, ludicrous, dumb to think like this, but that's what people do. There's a whole slew of causality happening, including my position towards the whole thing. I can turn around and just walk away because it's going to happen. Same thing with what's happening outside of me. This person does not look at the fact that things are impermanent. Why? Because they look at the solidity. They look for the solidity. So they are very much drenched in the perverted view of life. This is what we call in the Dhamma vipallasas, the distortions or the perversions, perverted ways of looking at the impermanent thing and trying to see and visualize and hope for it, imagine it to be a permanent thing. It's impermanent to begin with. But if I wait long enough, it's going to show itself to be permanent. We look for evidence to prove that delusion. Look at every relationship you've ever had. Everything that you reached for when it promised you the world of experiences, joy, this and that. We're seeking some permanence, especially if it's a good experience. Second, look for something beautiful, pleasant looking in the repulsive, in what is essentially repulsive, disgusting, unpleasant. Oh, look at my skin, how beautiful it is, the person says. And you go, okay, yeah. Let's take a swab and just like put it on a, underneath a microscope. But let's look at that very carefully. Person is shocked. Just, or your gut. There's billions and billions of bacteria. But I live a clean life. I live a sterile life. Yeah. So the third one is looking at dukkha and hoping to be sukha instead. Not seeing the dukkha reality of things and seeing the happy part, wanting to gain something happy, extract something happy based, something that gives us happiness, even though it is dukkha through and through. And then looking for a substantial self when there is none. It's just a causal relation all the time happening. Things are changing all the time, but we like to maintain that same one unified consciousness, the thing that carries over. There is no such thing, such a person. So these are the four perversions, vipallasas, that we have. But the person needs to have these things perpetuated somehow. And how to do that? Well, with the help of ayoniso manasikara. Because yoniso manasikara is very laser precise, very much like a laser precision. It cuts through. That's why insight or vipassana practice is penetrative. You penetrate into what do you penetrate? You go beyond the facade. Ayoniso manasikara keeps us on the outskirts of reality. It doesn't tell us the reality that's going on. It's like watching the news and expecting to find reality, the truth of what's really happening. It's stupid. It's never designed for that. How can I expect it to? Give me something that's truthful. It's not designed for that. These people are full of defilements to begin with. For example, I'm using something from the world that, that's current. So the second one that is mentioned here, pursuing the wrong spiritual path and training. The person might be putting a lot of effort and time and work into this, but if the path is wrong, how in the world are you going to attain? What you have today are so-called spiritual paths that gather, that find legitimacy by the fact that, well, they're sheer numbers. We must be right. Look how many students I have. I must be correct. I've met people like this. If what you're saying is true, then why are these people here to listen to me? I don't know. Talk to them, because they're pretty stupid to show up here. Because what you're saying is not Dhamma. As evidenced by these facts from the suttas, which your statements are not matching. Your behavior is not matching. Why are these people here? Because of many, many issues they have, or an aura that you're putting out as a teacher. Third is having an unmotivated heart with a listless mind. The heart is not motivated enough. And this is where Samvega again comes in. The urgency. You must have a reason to be wanting to come out of jail. You have to have a strong enough of a reason. I remember years ago when the movie Shawshank it came out, right? What was it? Release from Shawshank Redemption? I forgot that, but there's a Shawshank. It was a major prison jail. And I remember a scene where a person who was sentenced for almost like a lifetime. And so he had gone into prison, I think, when he was a teenager, and now he was in his late 80s or late 70s. So he had been released on good behavior, I guess. Now, this person did not know anything other than the prison culture. That was home. That was his safety. That was his security. So some people to this day, after having spent such a long time in prison, they are released despite their real intentions, which is to stay. So the person doesn't feel comfortable being free. He wants to go back. They feel now to be in prison out when there's no more cages to live in. They're actually out and about, they're getting food on their own, walking, but they feel completely, this is not the world they wanted. So this is another way of looking at the unmotivated heart, or a listless mind, or a heart that is, or the intention isn't there. You're not motivated enough. You lose your drive, or you look for things that are, I call them the bells and whistles of the path. You'll want to experience jhanas. You want to, and when you get to upekkha, you don't know what to do with it. I've heard people complaining about upekkha. Nothing's happening. How long am I going to sit in upekkha, Bhante? So they're always looking for something which is animating them to want to pursue. That they are not in the practice of Dhamma for the right reasons. They will drop out. Many people join groups. You see this in the Goenka group, of course. There's nothing happening, no insights, no wisdom takes place. There's no Dhamma, but the environment around it gives you the illusion that you're doing something, that you are part of a bigger group. And that is a lot more primal for many people, a lot more, actually deeper in significance. That's why majority of people, human beings, we are followers. The Dhamma is not for followers. The Dhamma is for the courageous ones. Despite the fact that we've had countless arahants. But each of these individuals struggled with these issues. You have to push through the inertia of your own ignorance. No one else's, ultimately. That's why we're not here to change the world as such from the outside. No, Lord Buddha is saying it clearly. So you need to be having the drive, the intention to do it. And the only way to do that is to, like the other sutta we did last week, where I mentioned how the Deva himself was saying in the Samyutta Nikāya, Bhante, he was addressing Lord Buddha, he says, a bhikkhu has to be, the person, the practitioner has to be like as if there's a spear that's coming at them to skewer them. You're going to be gutted. Or somebody's there with a sword, like Lord Buddha was saying in the Janapada Kalyani Sutta, or the sutta where he gave the simile of a man walking with a beautiful woman dancing and performing for the whole multitudes of crowd at night. And he's, meanwhile, holding a bowl of oil. He's supposed to go back and forth, do chankama, walking meditation, in that noisy crowd that's going berserk. And he's not supposed to lift even a single eye out to see what's happening, to not miss out. The moment he does, or he spills any drop of oil, there's this big guy over here with a sharp sword pulled out of its scabbard, ready to come down at his throat. That cannot allow you to have a listless mind. You're absolutely 100% motivated. That's how we ended up having arahants. Anything less, it's going to be impossible for even to attain sotapatti. Now, how many people do you know has that kind of a dedication? That is what's necessary, though. That's why I do these suttas exploration sessions, so that we remind ourselves of what is at stake, what should be at stake, and what it involves. It's not a matter of joining a group, talking Dhamma, being inspired, having a Dhamma name. No. It's pulling yourself out of the mess. Your hair is on fire. You have no options but to take care of it immediately. And that's what Lord Buddha is saying. That's the only way you're going to get rid of the 3 defilements. And therefore, by extension, birth, aging, and death are done for you. Or you're done for them. No more. That's the only way. Not enough, there cannot be enough bows you could do to the Buddha, to your teacher, or something like that, or sila taking precepts that could cut it. Because they would be just simply rites and rituals. Therefore, because without having first dispelled and abandoned these 3 things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon the view of having a personal, substantially unchanging essence of a self, doubts about what the true path is, and the holding on to the view that ceremonies and rituals would somehow release one from suffering or lead one to attain the goal of the holy life. 5th, and because without first having dispelled and abandoned 3 things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon unwise radical attention, pursuing the wrong spiritual path and training, and having an unmotivated heart with a listless mind. Excuse me. And what are these 3 which cause us to have ayoniso manasikara, etc., etc.? Living a life without mindfulness, lacking in full awareness, and possessing an agitated heart. Basically, not having sati, not having sampajanya, and having an agitated heart. The agitation might be as a result of many things. You can even call it or blame it on past trauma, past toxic relationships, or not being taken care of in the past as a child. Okay, that's why we're practicing to calm things down. Full awareness, when you move from one room to the next, experiment. Do I have full awareness of my body? Is the temperature the same from one room to the next? How about mindfulness? Are you aware of the thinking that's going on? Can you observe that? Or at least ask yourself, what is that I'm feeling? What is that? Because oftentimes we never question our feelings, our emotions. The flavor, the emotional flavor that is at that moment taking place, how often do you pause to question it? We don't. That's what ayoniso manasikara does. It comes in and now it sees something, it is triggered by that thing. All of a sudden, because you had that emotional state, which is fuel, by the way, triggered by this, which it was completely unrelated, suddenly the drive, the defilement, the hatred, the dosa comes in from past lives because you have the asavas working in the background, the contaminants of the heart. Suddenly, there's an ignition, igniting, an explosion. And then you look around, what is the most visible, what is the most tangible thing that you can point your finger at and say, it's you? This is completely missing the Dhamma aspect of things. Why? Because I didn't look at the causality. This is, in essence, you practicing paticcasamuppada. Because you just saw, wait a minute, there was something else other than this that contributed to my current state. And this is where the breaking of sila happens. But it's happening so fast. Hence, before it turns into ayoniso manasikara, there needs to be a lack in mindfulness, Lord Buddha is saying. Because the slip up happens there. You slipped on maintaining sati. Mara is always there, trying to trip you over. Just make you, tie your shoelaces together without you noticing. Sati says, wait a minute, how come my feet aren't moving as I want them? Yoniso manasikara says, let me look down at my shoelaces. And you look down and say, right effort is you reaching down and loosening up those shoelaces and tying them proper. But Yoniso Manasikara is always checking to see, okay, is the road, is the path even? Am I placing my feet in the right place at the right time, at the right pace? Therefore, because without having first dispelled and abandoned these three things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon unwise radical attention, pursuing the wrong spiritual path and training, and having an unmotivated heart with a listless mind. Furthermore, bhikkhus, without having first dispelled and abandoned three things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon living a life without mindfulness, lacking in full awareness, and possessing an agitated heart. So you see how it's like one floor over the other. One floor supporting the other. So if you're building a skyscraper, you can't start from floor number 7 or number 10. You need every single one, and especially the one preceding that floor that we're talking about. If it's a 30-story high building, you need all 29 in order for you to get to the 30th. Lord Buddha says, and what are these three? Not being interested in or refusing to go and see the noble ones. Not being interested in or refusing to go and hear the teachings of the noble ones. And possessing a contentious heart that always seeks to find fault in others. There were many, many teachers at the time of Lord Buddha. Today we have many, 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 many teachers. How many people are actually going to these teachers for the right reasons? I know it happened to me in Asia, where people would mention that they like to go to different teachers to attend retreats and this and that with teachers. And when you do the numbers as far as like process of elimination as to what might be the reason or reasons for them to want to go and see these teachers, it usually comes down to things that don't have any relation to the Dhamma. It's very superficial, meaning the number of followers they have, how famous they are. How do you know this? Well, when you ask them about the teaching itself and how the teaching has within it Dhamma, or something that is beneficial to them, that has proven itself, its worth basically, to them, for them, and that's why they're going. And that's not pursuing the teacher or becoming a student to someone simply because for the right reasons. There's something wrong, and that was what was happening also at the time of Lord Buddha. And that's why it died out in India, because people love bells and whistles, as I was saying. You need to be excited, you need to be agitated internally. I've shared with this, I think, a few times. I apologize if I've shared it too much, but it's pertinent. One time when I was a lay Dhamma teacher at the time. After the Dhamma talk, a gentleman in his early 70s, maybe late 70s, came by, and somebody who's a big, supporter of the temple. And he said, could you make your talks more exciting? And I said, how? What do you mean exciting? No, don't get me wrong. Your Dhamma is very, like you give very strict, you're like very, very, this highlights and this and that principle. I said, okay, but could you tell a few jokes? I can't forget this. This was over 10 years ago. I still remember it like it was, clear as day. I said, oh, I'm sorry. He said, yeah, could you be like that Ajahn over there, like this, he named some famous teachers, well known today, to this day. And I said, I'm sorry, but that's called entertainment. And Lord Buddha, my teacher, was not an entertainer. You're asking me to become an entertainer, like a character like Osho, Rajneesh character. Like he would tell jokes to get people be awake and laugh, and you feel, oh, I have a cool teacher. Now people are saying, oh, I have a cool Ajahn, I have a cool Bhante, I have a cool Bhikkhu or Sayadaw or something cool. What is that? That's agitation in the mind. I really doubt anybody ever called Lord Buddha a cool teacher for 45 years. No, Lord Buddha gave them coolness of Nibbana. That's different. The coolness that is Nibbana. Because the fire went out. That's too much to ask for many people, because they still are very much attached to the fire, to the bana portion or vana portion, which is the fire. But Lord Buddha gave us the antidote of dukkha, it being nibbana, the ending, the extinction of the fire, the flame. How many people really want that? Hence the deficit in Samvega in people's hearts. That's why not everyone is in it for the right reason, meaning attain freedom from dukkha. Some other reason is there, not the true Dhamma. And that's why the person is going to be contentious. They're always going to be fighting with others, as if the other person's defilement is somewhat going to affect them. Ajahn Mun would say in his Kanda Vimutti poem, a beautiful, beautiful rendition of Ajahn Mun's teaching Dhamma in such a poetic way, which requires many, many listening or reading. But in it he says, I used to have a contentious heart. I used to find fault with others. But then I realized, he says, no matter how bad the other person's defilements, they will never take me to hell. Never. Mine, however, will. And to the depths of hell, if I'm not aware of what's happening. So ultimately, the other person's mistakes are ultimately theirs. What can I do? What I can do is I can work on myself. I can really muster up the energy so that I can no longer stay in a listless, lazy, tired, unmotivated, state of mind. And that's why the image of a sword being raised right over one's head, or a spear that's ready to be skewering you. These are heavy images, and today I really doubt people would like this, or especially expect teachers to talk about these things. But these have 100% legitimacy because they come directly from Lord Buddha. And we definitely must use these images to shock us. Today's society doesn't get shocked for the right reasons. To shock us back to the immediacy of life, because we're dealing with birth, aging, and death. This is serious. Simply because you might not be dealing with the issue of death now in your life, or the terrible, terrible sickness that others are inflicted with or by. If you are not there yet, doesn't mean you're not going to get there. Every one of us will die. And there will be tremendous fear involved, terror involved. How you deal with it, how you address it, how you approach it, death. And whether you're able to leave this body tomorrow and say thanks, but no thanks, I'm done. That is what Lord Buddha is teaching us, guiding us to get to. But you won't be able to do that unless you have worked towards that while you were alive, not in those last moments. Otherwise, we would be like any other religion out there, faith-based religion that is, eternalistic view of, after this, we're going to go to some heavenly realm and we're going to be there forever and ever. No, that's not this path. Therefore, bhikkhus, without first having dispelled and abandoned these three things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon living a life without mindfulness, lacking in full awareness, and possessing an agitated heart. 7. Bhikkhus, without first having dispelled and abandoned three things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon the disinterest and refusal to go and see the noble ones, the disinterest and refusal to go and hear the teachings of the noble ones, and possessing a contentious heart that always seeks to find fault in others. And what are these three? Restlessness, lack in restraining the sense faculties, and living an immoral and evil life without any virtue. Restlessness. Remember, this is one of the major Sangyojanas, the fetters. And it will be there right before you attain arahantship. So that's a big hurdle to overcome. Lack of restraint, that is the sangvara, not sangvega, but sangvara is the restraint. So this is a lack in that, to protect your eyes. Let's say there have been people who would say, well, I like to go and associate, or I like to go and hang out with individuals who are drug addicts, or they are overcoming alcoholism, and they claim to be practitioners of Dhamma. And they assure me that they're practicing Sila. Okay, or they go and spend time in an environment where there's alcohol, and they used to be drinkers of alcohol. There is partying, there's this. People are basically letting loose of all their inhibitions. And this person would go and place himself or herself there. And then later on, when I ask, why? They're like, no, I'm okay. I'm very well protected. No, that's stupid, because you just broke your precepts. So this is very much conceit-based, ignorance-based. And the person is very much still attached through osmosis to those inequities, to those imperfections, to those things that one is supposed to be practicing. So you don't go around putting your hand in the alligator's mouth to prove that you're advanced in practice, that you're courageous, or you put your head inside of the mouth of a lion, living lion. No, that's stupid. You need to practice restraint, because the person might have the drive, they might have other issues going on, totally irrespective of the Dhamma. So they want to color that with Dhammic language, which is a terrible, terrible thing. So they've been using the Dhamma for the wrong reasons, to promote the identity, the atta, the sakkaya ditthi, the identity of a self. Like I was mentioning, how it's like therapists, licensed individuals, psychologists who have now the knowledge, book knowledge, terms, this and that, or even techniques to go and supposedly to help people, but they themselves are suffering from severe, even more severe mental states than those that they purport to be helping. That is a disaster waiting to happen. Similarly, somebody who goes and studies the Dhamma is very much responsible to preserve the Dhamma properly in their practice. So this is again Lord Buddha's warning to restrain the sense faculties. Otherwise, you're like Ajahn Mano, I was saying, some bhikkhus would want to, on their own, without asking the teacher, to prove themselves that they are courageous, or they can, because they had heard Ajahn Man or similar, high-level students of his, arahants, had, stayed in a cave where it was known to be inhabited by every once in a while a tiger, let's say. So the person would throw themselves in the midst of a path of a tiger without checking in with the teacher, who knows a lot about them than they do about themselves. So there's many layers to restraint, which the person doesn't have. And ultimately that leads the person to have an immoral life because of their choices. And then they come around, why do you have a living, why can't or how could a person have a life that is immoral or unethical after the Dhamma? Because of misunderstanding the Dhamma, because they were propelled, motivated by the wrong reasons. And then you see these people leaving the Dhamma and having a normal life, or going and joining some other thing. And then they live an immoral life, and they blame the Dhamma as if the Dhamma had anything to do with it. Dukkha, dukkha, dukkha. Therefore, because without first having dispelled and abandoned these three things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon disinterest and refusal to go and see the noble ones, the disinterest and refusal to go and hear the teachings of the noble ones, and possessing a contentious heart that always seeks to find fault in others. Number 8, bhikkhus, without first having dispelled and abandoned three things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon restlessness, the lack in restraining the sense faculties, and living an immoral and evil life without any virtue. And what are these three? Not possessing strong faith in one's heart, stinginess, and being lazy. Saddha, I mentioned earlier how crucial it is. Saddha is the thing that says, if I am finding solace, if I am finding true comfort in, let's say, reading a verse or reading a sentence from the teachings of Lord Buddha, it's actually putting things in perspective. Instead of treating that as a one-time thing that happened to you in the past and saying, yeah, but it's not always like that. I don't feel like it has some truth to it, to me in other areas of my life. That means you've allowed doubt to seep in. You didn't fan the flame. It's the embers to create fire out of that, to burn through the darkness, the ignorance. You have to really maintain good, steady attention to grow your saddha in this case. We do have saddha, otherwise you can't keep coming back and sitting. You can't come back to these retreats. You can't come back to the suttas. You get tired. Or you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Maybe you're doing it for the company, or I don't know, whatever. That's wrong. So the strong faith has to be nurtured. And then you have stinginess, Lord Buddha says. That's a big hurdle. I know entire populations, entire countries, in fact, from my travels, you get an idea. Populations, you go into different countries, different continents, different areas, and you see some having more of a drive to really be open-handed with their generosity. And they don't necessarily have to see something like a return on their investment. And then you see others that really put the effort saying, okay, how is this person going to survive? So I've had people, in my case, for example, they would ask me, so how do you do this? Some places they weren't even, let's say, Buddhist, the area, the country, this and that. And they would ask, like, so how do you how do you travel? Where do you stay? This, that, over the course of these last several years since my ordination. And I would tell them very candidly, I'm using Airbnb, this, that, this, and they're like, wow, but that's costly. Yes. Food, how do you do food? Like, I eat this, but are you strict? In some areas, in some things, I am. But if I'm traveling, I can't be. Otherwise, I'm going to starve because my life doesn't allow that. Okay. So they do the math in their head, and all of a sudden, their generosity shows. Why? Because they've done consideration. Others I've seen, and this is interesting because we see this again and again, from a majority of Puthujjanas who've approached Lord Buddha would start them from the adverse effects of stinginess, miserliness, and the benefits of being generous. People don't realize the very fact that they're alive today and in a human body owes a great deal, yes, to their sila, but before sila kicked in, guess what kicked in? Their dana. The ability to have eyes that see color. The ability to have these 6 sense organs that detect the world You can experience the world fully. So, stinginess, it's a big topic. Generosity is a big topic. I'd rather talk about generosity than stinginess, but basically stinginess cuts it short. There are individuals that I've seen who practice diligently, but when it comes to being generous, it's not working. They're so close-fist. They can't help it for some reason. There's some issues there. They are afraid to let go, but they want to gain. So little, but gaining a lot. So, but that is cutting themselves, like the connection. You're blocking your way from receiving. And that's how the Dhamma is nature, ultimately. And similarly with laziness. If the farmer is lazy, there's not going to be any crops to harvest. If the baker doesn't get up early in the morning to set up, to put the yeast in the dough and this and that to create all those things that later on become bread, the entire village is going to go hungry. And he's going to remain poor. He's going to close shop. The examples are numerous, as you well know. So these three. I'm just going to not repeat those repetitions. I guess I'm just going to go with the number areas. Again, the Sutta PDF available. Please read it at your own pace. 9. Bhikkhus, without first having dispelled and abandoned three things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon the lack of strong faith in one's heart, stinginess, and being lazy. And what are these three? Inconsideration of others, being unwilling to correct oneself, and maintaining evil friendships. Let's start from the back. Evil friendships. I was giving the example of individuals who would go to a club, who would go to a party, who would go to, in California, there is the yearly crazy loony event called the Dead Man something in the desert, Burning Man. Anything goes, everything goes. There's no inhibitions. If Las Vegas is without, virtue, completely immoral, this is even like 10 grades below that, from what I've heard. Okay. I've met people who claim to be practitioners and would sit beautifully for hours because, I met some of them in India, and they couldn't wait to come back to the States so that they could go attend Burning Man. And because they were also going to be around individuals who do drugs, because they would openly talk about these things. And I would just be shocked. Like, how do you put them together in one sentence? Evil friendships. There's Dhammic life, there's adhammic life. So you need to sever the connection. Once Dhamma is growing, once you want the Dhamma to grow within you, that is, you cannot maintain old relationships where their lifestyle goes against the Dhamma. Something has to go. You cannot have both live there within you in your life. Similarly with your own attributes, your own tendencies, proclivities. That's why we practice Sila. If you have a negative attitude towards yourself, your body, or something about you, while you also want to practice the Dhamma, again, it's an evil friendship with your previous you. You have to let go of that. Otherwise, it's like you're fighting against yourself. No side is going to win because it's you. Being unwilling to correct oneself. You can tell a person, there's that saying, like, you can lead a horse to a stream or a river, but you can't make it drink. It has to decide on its own. Many people turn back, gallop their way up the hill. They don't drink, even if you've led them there because they asked you to. So this is something that happens, and it was happening at the time of Lord Buddha. It's from time immemorial. This does happen. So what we can do is make sure that we do not have these qualities. That's why I said this is a personal journey. This sutta is talking about us. This is not about someone else ultimately. I'm using examples from other people as well, with the hope that we identify those qualities within us and we eradicate those, cut them off. So we're always supposed to be willing to correct ourselves. This is key. Sometimes I'm surprised, I'm amazed, even in the suttas, I see this within some of the senior monks in the suttas who saw Lord Buddha. They saw the color of his eyes, spoke to him, they heard his voice in his presence, and they would still put up a fight. I mean, argue with Lord Buddha to prove their position. So the person didn't pick up. They definitely are not going to correct themselves. Like Malunkyaputta. Decades later, he comes back and he's like drooping. He's like, Bhante, I'm going to die. Could you, the same Malunkyaputta who was putting all the list of things there, Bhante, unless you tell me this and this and this, give me the answers, the 10 questions, right? And unless you show me your psychic abilities, I'm going to disrobe and leave. And Lord Buddha said, did I promise you any of those things while ordaining you? You came to me. He says, no, Bhante, you didn't. I said, okay. Foolish man. And he gave the example, the parable of the poisoned arrow, the man being shot in the leg, who says, I'm not going to be administered by a doctor unless I know who shot me, etc., etc. Years later, decades later, he shows up begging for instruction. And Lord Buddha says, oh, now you show up. What am I supposed to say to the young novice monks over there sitting? And you, gray-haired, bald man sitting there, decades later, Malunkyaputta. So he scolds him, chastises him in front of all these people. So Lord Buddha was not a softy, ever. When situations arose, of course, but he was very perfectly balanced. He was the quintessence of a perfect teacher. So when it was necessary to scold, to berate, to critique, he was there. He would do it like no other. But he was also caring. So he also showed Malunkyaputta the way, and he goes and practices and becomes an arahant. So he could have made his job easier, his own, by being willing to correct himself far earlier. In consideration of others, this is a big one. Because metta without considering others and their situations is not metta at all. Metta is all about consideration, loving. It's not a matter of status. Humility is necessary. Metta is all about humility, kindness, but it's courageous too. 10. And bhikkhus, without first having dispelled and abandoned 3 things, it is impossible to dispel or abandon in consideration of others, being unwilling to correct oneself and the maintaining of evil friendships. And what are these 3? Lack of wise moral shame in one's heart, lack of wise moral fear in one's heart, and being negligent in one's training. Hiri and ottappa are these 2. Wisely, being moral. Wise is key. Otherwise, like anything, it could be lopsided. Many things, many crimes have been committed. Entire populations on the planet were wiped out because of morality. Entire generations, their future was obliterated because of moral values or shame. Toxic shame is a big one, right? But there is a wise shame. There's a wise morality. That's different completely. That's what we call hiri and ottappa. To have these 2 missing is what Lord Buddha said is the end of days. When a bhikkhu in the Anguttara Nikāya, I think it was in Book of the Fives, where a bhikkhu comes and asks, Bhante, what will be the signs of the end of times? He says, when people have no more hiri and ottappa, families don't have hiri and ottappa towards each other. Societies, rulers don't have hiri and ottappa. Look around us. People don't care. There's inconsideration through and through. There's negligence. also in one's training, in one's own responsibility towards the world, towards each other. Placing yourself in the other person's shoes. That's a beautiful statement in English, but how often do we practice it? Again, hiri and ottappa. One says, if I allow myself, if I don't have restraint, right? Sangvara, and I allow myself to do this, to think this, to say this, simply because I can. I have the means now. Perhaps I'm in a powerful position. I can exercise that and get away with it. Okay. But what if I am on the receiving end of that and someone else has that power and I am being subjected to that action? How would I feel about that? Immediately, Hiri would say, stop it. I would be totally wrong. I can't do that. Why? Because now like somebody who wants to cheat against their spouse, their loved one, against their wife or their husband. Why? Because they have an attractive coworker there, and no one's there. There's long hours, and no one will know, and they're okay. They're consenting adult. I'm a consenting adult, so I should be able to do it. Okay, hold on a minute before you entertain any further on that idea. Let's switch the roles. What if it is, let's step away and it's your spouse, it's your husband in that position, your position. And they have a coworker, the opposite sex, somebody they're attracted to. And they will stop mid-sentence. They will not even complete that thought. Why? Because they felt the pain. That's hiri ottappa in action. The other aspect of ottappa here would be when you're having a thought, you're about to say something, when you're about to do something, and all of a sudden you notice somebody that you respect, let's say from the suttas, Lord Buddha himself sitting there watching. Would you allow yourself to continue that sentence, that thought, that action? Or would you stop it immediately because you can't, it's not, no, I can't do that. It's wrong. I'm embarrassed. There you go. So one works internally, the other works externally. Intrinsic, extrinsic. And the third one was the negligence in one's training. So that's why your training has to maintain itself sharp. No one can do that other than you. And know this, bhikkhus, that the one who lives without the presence of wise moral shame and wise moral fear in his heart is inescapably negligent. That's why it's happening, because it takes effort for you to consider, wait a minute, before I go ahead with this, simply because I can do it doesn't mean I should do it. But unfortunately, we're living in a society that even demolished, mangled up the English language. So there's that word, misused, overly misused word of empowerment. Complete ludicrous usage of it. Feel empowered to do this. Yeah, feel empowered to break sila left and right until I put myself on the receiving end. So somebody who has that, hiri and ottappa, they cannot be negligent. They're very alert. No. And for such a negligent person, it is impossible to possess respect towards others. Hence, he is inconsiderate of others, remaining unwilling and stubborn to even try and correct himself while maintaining evil companionships and friendships. Also, it is impossible for the one who associates with evil friends to gain, let alone possess, strong faith in his heart, or to abandon stinginess and laziness. So if something is missing, if you're not developing in your practice, there's a problem somewhere. So it's not all rose-colored. Why? Because your practice should demonstrate that. There should be less agitation in your heart. So that's the moment that you need to go back to writing down in a journal, being honest with yourself. Okay, what am I doing? What am I missing? So you're looking at the equation or the math problem in a sense. Okay? And you're seeing, where is this? Something is crooked somewhere because I'm not gaining the result. And it's not the fault of the Dhamma, by the way, if your practice isn't going deeper. Similarly, it is impossible for the lazy person to dispel restlessness or the lack in restraining his sense faculties and to abandon living an immoral and evil life without any virtue. Also, it is impossible for such an immoral person who lives without virtue to somehow dispel or abandon the disinterest or the refusal to go and see the noble ones. You want to rush to go and see the Buddha, to listen to, let's say, to a talk given by the Arahants, or anyone who you feel that is speaking Dhamma, to abandon the disinterest or the refusal to go and hear the teachings, or to relinquish having a contentious heart that always seeks to find fault in others. Similarly, it is impossible for the person who is driven to argue with and find fault in others to dispel having a life that lacks mindfulness, to abandon his lack in full awareness, and to abandon possessing such an agitated heart. That is key. Your heart need not be agitated. Lord Buddha would chastise individuals, like I was saying earlier, when the conditions were there necessary for him to do so. But at no point was his heart agitated. Not just him, you can use Venerable Venerable Sariputta as an example. When he was assaulted by that Brahmin who hit him on the back to prove that he is not that full of metta, he's not with patience, forgiveness, forbearance, and he doesn't behave, he doesn't react, he doesn't turn around and yell at the person, his mind is unagitated. Lord Buddha later on mentions, in the absence of Venerable Sariputta, to the students who were reporting this event to Lord Buddha, as he said, Sariputta is like Mother Earth. She takes everything, the feces, the excrement, the blood, gold, that people toss into it, without preferential treatment. Venerable Sariputta, he says, Sariputta, you pay him compliments, his mind is unagitated. You try to insult him, his mind is unagitated. He physically gets abused, assaulted, his mind is unagitated. There you go. That's an inspiration as to where the Dhamma can take us. Somebody who possesses such an agitated heart, to dispel or abandon his unwise radical attention or his pursuit, it is impossible for him to dislodge himself from unwise radical attention or his pursuit of the wrong spiritual path and training, and to stop having an unmotivated heart while dispelling his listless mind. The person has to not have the agitated heart if they want to go deeper. It needs to be reducing in its agitation level. It is impossible, therefore, for the one possessing an unmotivated heart, led by his listless and sluggish mind, to dispel his view of having a personal and substantially unchanging essence of a self, to abandon his doubts about what the true path is, or to relinquish his tenacious hold on the view that ceremonies and rituals would somehow release one from suffering or lead one to attain the goal of the holy life. Therefore, because it is also impossible for the one who has doubts festering in him to somehow dispel lust, hatred, and delusion from his heart. Thus, because without dispelling and abandoning lust, hatred, and delusion, it is impossible to dispel or abandon birth, aging, and death. So you see how Lord Buddha took us in full circle. He started from birth, aging, and death, and now he's returned back the other way. How by sticking to the wrong way of addressing these problems keeps us in the cycle of dukkha, that is birth, aging, and death. But because by dispelling and abandoning three things, it becomes possible to dispel and abandon birth, aging, and death. And what are these three? So this is the nirodha portion of the teaching. Remember, that was the dukkha which keeps the person in this whole mass of suffering. This is the nirodha portion. One is dukkha, this is the cessation of dukkha. Lord Buddha is giving us the antidote like he always does, always. So what are these things that need to be dispelled? Lust, hatred, and delusion. Again, they didn't have recording devices. They weren't allowed to write these things down. What they did have was and is their memory. Mnemonic devices. So oftentimes these are not there to make us get bored, become tedious in their repetitive qualities, but they're there to help us recall even to this day. Because you can't take out your iPad or computer or phone or a book in the middle of your busy day to look up something. No, ideally it's supposed to be internalized to understand, okay, that's what the monks had to work with when they were in the midst of commotions, difficulties, when someone looked at them in a mean way or said something terrible, derogatory. So they had all these emotions coming up as they were interacting with locals or even amongst each other. So that's a perfect time to exercise and to practice the Dhamma, but you have to have Dhamma. So that's why Lord Buddha is giving us now the cessation portion of the suffering, but again using lust, hatred, and delusion. But the delivery is by dispelling and abandoning these three. Earlier it was because of these three, now by the abandoning of these three. But the key thing is these three. That's why the name Tayodhamma, the name of the sutta. So if one of these is picked up by the bhikkhu as they're practicing and in their day, that could be it for that person to attain. Similarly, by having dispelled and abandoned three things, it then becomes possible to dispel and abandon birth, aging, and death. And what are these three? The view of having a personal and substantially unchanging essence of a self, doubts about what the true path is, and holding on to the view that ceremonies and rituals would somehow release one from suffering or lead one to attain the goal of the holy life. And bhikkhus, by having dispelled and abandoned three things, it then becomes possible to dispel and abandon the view of having a personal and substantially unchanging essence of a self, doubts about what the true path is, and the holding on to the view that ceremonies and rituals would somehow release one from suffering or lead one to attain the goal of the holy life. And what are these three? Unwise radical attention, pursuing the wrong spiritual path and training, and having an unmotivated heart with a listless mind. So those last paragraphs I'm removing from each of these sections because we've gone over them already. Further, bhikkhus, by having dispelled and abandoned three things, it then becomes possible to dispel and abandon unwise radical attention, ayoniso manasikara, pursuing the wrong spiritual path and training, and having an unmotivated heart with a listless mind. And what are these three things? Living a life without mindfulness, lacking in full awareness, and possessing an agitated heart. By the way, every time you hear wrong spiritual path, that doesn't mean a religion other than Dhamma. Or even within the teachings of Lord Buddha's original teachings, the Theravada tradition, outside of that, that automatically makes it wrong spiritual tradition, spiritual path. No. Within the Theravada tradition, which is a big umbrella term, by the way, the history is very messy as to how it came about, the Theravada. It's a simplification to kind of put them under one umbrella. But within even bhikkhus, Theravadan bhikkhus, the teachings, you still have a lot of wrong spiritual paths being promulgated. So what do you do? Because most of these are found within Theravada. The issues with the rites and rituals, the beliefs in eternalist view, Buddha dies, so there's a place that they go to. All these things, if not said aloud, written in stone, they nevertheless are hinted at the very least at by monks. So the whole Dhamma had become, in many cases, a matter of just giving dana, and that's it. That's the wrong path. That's what I'm trying to say. So the wrong path is a path that lacks Dhamma proper. And what is Dhamma proper? The teachings of Lord Buddha that we find still in the Pali Nikāyas. That's it. You have to do the work to find out whether it matches the reality of life, reality of what you're observing, the behavior in you, development. Is it happening? If it's not, there's something wrong. The teaching is not at fault. Something is wrong. The teachings of Lord Buddha, that is. That is, it behooves upon us. And how? Living a life without mindfulness, lacking in full awareness and possessing an agitated heart, lead us astray from the Dhamma. And bhikkhus, by having dispelled and abandoned three things, what are these three? That a person becomes able to abandon living a life without mindfulness, lack of full awareness, and possessing agitated heart, not being interested in or refusing to go and see the noble ones, like I was just saying. The teachings of Lord Buddha. That's why we are so fortunate today that we have the suttas. Not just this collection or the ones that I've already done or narrated, but you have a plethora of versions out there online where you can do your own cross-referencing to kind of get the right, okay, what's being said here? What's being lost to translation? Because there's a lot that is being lost to translation. Unfortunately, there's that hurdle. Therefore, bhikkhus, by having dispelled and abandoned these three things, it then becomes possible to dispel and abandon living a life without mindfulness, lacking in full awareness, and possessing an agitated heart. By dispelling and abandoning three things, it then becomes possible to dispel and abandon the disinterest and refusal to go and see the noble ones, their teachings, and possessing a contentious heart. What are these three? Restlessness, lack in restraining the sense faculties, and living an immoral and evil life without any virtue. And how do you dispel these three? I'm paraphrasing now. Not possessing strong faith in one's heart, basically the opposite of saddha, stinginess, miserliness, and being lazy. Therefore, bhikkhus, by having dispelled and abandoned these three things, it then becomes possible to abandon restlessness, the lack in sense restraint, and living an immoral life. But how do you abandon these three? The lack in strong faith, stinginess, and being lazy, in consideration of others, being unwilling to correct oneself, and maintaining evil friendships. One has to be easy to be corrected. This is key. There's no benefit in holding on to your guns, as they say. When you've gone to the text, to the suttas, to a teacher, for the reason of learning. If you're unmistakable, then you were fine to begin with. Why did you need to go back to the suttas or to go to the suttas in the first place or to look for a teacher? Because you were fine to begin with. So there you see the dilemma or debacle, because the person is stuck. A granite has more hope of growth than that person's heart. At least the granite is going to end up being sand under someone's feet on the beach somewhere in a few billion years. Therefore, bhikkhus, by having dispelled and abandoned three things, it then becomes possible to dispel and abandon in consideration of others, being unwilling to correct oneself, and maintaining evil friendships. What are these three? Lack of wise moral shame in one's heart, lack of wise moral fear in one's heart, and being negligent in one's mind. Therefore, know this, bhikkhus, that the one who lives with the presence of wise moral shame and wise moral fear in his heart is always vigilant and heedful. And with such a vigilant person, it becomes inescapable for him to possess respect towards others. Hence, he is considerate of others, as he remains willing and humble to look for ways to correct himself while maintaining good spiritual companions and their friendship. Show me who your friends are, and I'll show you where and who you are. That's an old saying, right? That still holds true, especially in the Dhamma. Also, it becomes possible for such a person who associates with good spiritual friends to increasingly gain and possess strong faith in his heart. while also abandoning stinginess as he becomes energetic with persevering effort rather than being lazy. So associate with spiritual friends, and they will encourage you with your interactions with them. So long as your intentions are for the Dhamma and your growth in the Dhamma, you will deepen in your understanding of sila, dana, generosity, and you're going to be walking away from stinginess. You're going to be walking away from living an immoral life and evil companions. Similarly, it becomes possible for such an energetic person to dispel restlessness, as well as strengthen himself with an ever-present sense of restraint of his sense faculties, while abandoning living an immoral and evil life, and instead living a truly virtuous life. And such a virtuous and moral person then becomes eager to rush and see the noble ones, while abandoning the old disinterest he had. And instead, he enthusiastically wants to go and hear the teachings of the noble ones, by relinquishing his old contentious heart that always sought to find fault in others. Furthermore, such a person who is no longer driven to arguments nor tries to find fault in others, then naturally becomes established in mindfulness, supported by his ever-present full awareness, while abandoning and relinquishing agitation from his heart. And bhikkhus, it then becomes possible for this person, whose heart is no longer agitated, to possess wise radical attention as he leaves behind his past pursuit in the wrong spiritual path and their training, being led by his motivated heart and mental clarity. And for such a person who is now driven by a motivated heart with mental clarity, it becomes possible to dispel his old view of having a personal and substantially unchanging essence of a self, as he naturally abandons his old doubts about what the true path is, while relinquishing his once tenacious hold on the view that ceremonies and rituals would somehow release him from suffering and lead one to attain the goal of the holy life, realizing the absurdity of such a view. Therefore, bhikkhus, it becomes possible for the one liberated from doubts to also dispel and abandon lust, hatred, and delusion from his heart. Thus, bhikkhus, by dispelling and abandoning lust, hatred, and delusion, it becomes possible to dispel and put an end to birth, aging, and death entirely. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Really intricate sutta, and I always feel I didn't do enough justice to it because I was, for one, I think I was also rushing through it at times because I wanted to cover as much of it as possible. But it's a beautiful sutta, nevertheless. Try to see if you can find yourself, your progress, your practice in it somewhere. Is there any area in it? Are there areas in it that kind of hit home for you, as the saying goes? Kind of feel like, yeah, I think I might. Because ultimately, the Dhamma has to serve you, to pull you out of ignorance. Otherwise, why? Who cares? It's a prescription. It's a medication that is required for us to relieve us from suffering. So we don't practice Dhamma. We don't carry the Dhamma over our head. Even the Noble Eightfold Path, once the Arahant crosses over to the other shore, drops it. They don't carry it around. You won't see an Arahant coming knocking on your door and saying, hey, you have to practice the Noble Eightfold Path. This is, I found the way, I found the light. You must see the light. There's no such thing. They're not attached to it. You have to beg them to teach it to you. So, I've spoken a lot, so I applaud your patience. Are there any questions, comments? Well, if there are none, then let's transfer some merits. Akasatha Chabumata Devanagamahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Lokasasanam. Akasatha Chabumata Devanagamahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam. Akasatha Chabumata Devanagamahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mampati. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May clarity in your mind become brighter and brighter every day. May you taste the Dhamma, the fruits of the Dhamma now rather than later, today rather than tomorrow. And may your willingness to push through, to trust that the urgency that Lord Buddha keeps reminding of us of is absolute must to have, to trust that and to look at your life and see the presence of suffering and not hide from it. May that give you enough of an encouragement to practice sati more, create that habit formation, habit, until it becomes yoniso manasikara. Putting the attention, right, wise attention on that point of contact. Yeah, I'm mad, but why am I mad? What happened? What triggered it? That is the point of contact. What started it all? Put that laser beam of inspection on that rather than the person who caused it or the situation. What did I approach this situation with? Usually is a good question. Because from yoniso manasikara, wisdom will arise. And without wisdom, there is no release from birth, aging, and death. So I hope this sutta was helpful in demonstrating that. May you be well. May your loved ones be well. May your progress continue steadily. Until next time. Sukhiyot.